Welcome back. I'm Debbie Brown, and I want you to join us as we explore being present with God in His world on the Disciples' Path by Harnish and Larosa. This chapter is about the priority of presence. It's about showing up for God, because God always shows up. So we'll be talking about corporate worship and exploring our own experience with corporate worship and small group community. Let me give you an example of something that happened to me that showed me the difference between a small group in faith and a group of neighbors. What I find is I'm coming back from a vacation to Florida, and I've been gone 3 days. Drive up into my garage, and right there at the door going into the house, water is pouring out into the garage. And my husband, king of the understatement, says, "This can't be good." And so we open the door, and water comes gushing out, and we're sloshing around in ankle-deep water. And I called my neighbor across the street, because he's kind of a handy guy. And I can visualize him sitting in his recliner, watching football, you know, leaning back, maybe napping a little bit. It's late on a Sunday evening, and he answers the phone, and I said, "Mike, I've got a flood over here." He said, "Call your insurance company. They'll take care of it." And so I called another neighbor that was kind of handy. In the meantime, my husband called the insurance company, and it's an answer machine on Sunday night, and said, "We'll get somebody to call you." And I called somebody else. And I said, can you come? We've got a flood in our house. This has never happened to me before. He said, "Call your insurance company." Okay, and so what happened was, as we were walking in the door, the washing machine hose had popped, and water was shooting in an arc out of the utility room, because there was a drain in the utility room. If it had just popped, the water would have run out. But it went over the drain and filled up our house with water. That month, we had 3.5 months of water go into our house. We still hadn't heard from the insurance company. I called 2 people from a small group that met regularly, and we were accountable to each other, and we were on our disciples' path together. They lived 20 minutes away. The other 2 people, right next door, right across the street, right at the end of my driveway. These 2 people showed up, one in 25 minutes, and I don't know what they had to do to get there that fast, but one had a wet vac, walked in and started getting up all the water, and the other person brought food and said, "You drove all day from Florida. I thought you might be hungry." A small community of faith. You know, when James Wesley talks about being in a small faith community, he said his heart was strangely warmed. I can't tell you how many times that my heart has been warmed in a group of people that share my faith story and who are there for me to worship and to pray and to read scripture. And they are my family. They are as close to me as anybody that is blood related to me. Our scripture today, Ecclesiastes 4, "For if they fall, one will lift up the others. Better than one, a threefold cord is not quickly broken." Think about that. Us together in worship. Remember the fish and the loaves. We bring the fish and the loaves, we put them at Jesus' feet, and He makes it bigger and better and more wonderful than we could even imagine. What the community is there for is it's a place for us to love. Jesus calls us to love. So we can go in the community of worship and love others, but it's also to be loved. Do you know people that can't receive a gift? I know a lot of people that give me gifts and bring me things and always thinking of me, and I try to give them something and they say, oh, no, 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 you don't owe me anything. If we are those people that can't receive a gift, we need to look deep in our hearts and say, why is it that we feel like we don't deserve to receive a gift? Because when you come into the presence of God, you've got to be willing to receive what God gives you. What John Wesley observed was that the people who participated in worship grew and matured in their faith. And the people that didn't fell away. It's something that can keep us close together. For if they fall, one will lift up the others. Now, we can come to worship and we can make it all about us and what we need. And when we do that, the church becomes the idol. Have we allowed our churches to become idols? Or are we there for the community of worship and presence, our presence in worship? Remember the story of the man who couldn't get to Jesus, and he needed to be healed, and he wanted to be healed, and he believed that Jesus could heal him, and he trusted that Jesus could heal him, but he couldn't get there. And his friends gathered him up and carried him to the roof of that structure and lowered him down in front of Jesus to be healed. And Jesus healed him. Sometimes in worship, you're there to carry somebody else. And sometimes in worship, we are there to be carried. You know, when my church carried me was in 2003, when my son, who is a Marine, was in a vehicle, an assault vehicle, going to Baghdad. I could not pray. I was so traumatized. I could not pray. And I came to my church, and they prayed for me. They carried me during that time. And I'll never forget their loving hands and their loving feet and their service to me when I could not pray. And that's what we do in the community of worship. Sometimes we're carried, sometimes we carry others. Let me tell you a couple of examples of church experience in my life. I've been to China 3 summers teaching for study abroad. As you know, China is under a communist government. And when we went there, we were told we could attend a communist Christian church. And so I took a few students, and my husband and I attended this church. In the communist-sanctioned Christian church, the Communist Party member sits in the pulpit, and the sermon has been approved by the government. And so the preacher preaches, and it was all in Chinese. I could not speak Chinese, but the pews looked the same, the church looked the same as it does here. And I just sat quietly during the sermon. One of the most beautiful things about that service was the Chinese people in the choir singing the hymns. The tunes were the same. The melodies were the same. And I wish that I could show you the picture that I saw there that day. They would sing up in the choir loft, and those faces were turned to God like this, and tears were streaming down their faces. And they had their hands like this and singing those songs, and they went straight to my heart. And I could feel the presence of God there. It was an amazing experience for me. Now, I had another experience at a Christian church in China. There's something called a non-Chinese passport church. If you have a Chinese passport, or if you're a Chinese citizen, you cannot attend. But if you're from out of the country, you can go to this church. And it was more like what you're used to. We could say anything that we wanted to there. There was no Communist Party member there. And the preacher asked us to pray together out loud And I know there was 10 to 20 different languages there, people from all over the world. And we prayed together, and those voices went up. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And I couldn't even understand what the other people were saying. But we were all praising God that we were there and had the opportunity to worship together in a place where the people that live there are not allowed to do. One other time, I was in Jerusalem, and I was at the church of St. Anne's. Now, St. Anne was Mary's mother. And this church, you remember that? We were singing. Someone encouraged us to sing together in that church, and it was a small church made out of stone. And so we stood right under the dome of that church, and we sang together. Our group, 20-something people. And standing on the floor, I could hear other people singing. We were a little off-key, a little pitchy, little musicality wasn't so great. I could hear that down here. But when it went up into that dome and came back down, it sounded perfect. And I thought, this is what it's like for God. You know, He takes all of our pitchy, off-tune, off-key, out of sync offerings, and He makes it beautiful and perfect in the community of worship and sends it back down to us. Now, we can be open to giving up our imperfect selves and letting God make it right. Or we can come to church and be a nation of observers like we are. Let me tell you, the funniest thing to me in the United States is our kitchens. Everybody wants granite countertops, tile backsplash, the current color of the cabinets, the current color of the knobs, perfect lighting, and then we go make a sandwich and go sit in the living room and watch cooking shows. Or we go out to eat. Those beautiful kitchens, I can't tell you how many people's homes I've been to that I just peeked in the oven and it looked like it had never been used, in the most beautiful kitchens you've ever seen. We're a nation of observers. Let's look at what we do with our celebrities. We put them up on a pedestal as high as we can, and then we throw rocks at them. We say, look at Aretha Franklin singing the national anthem. She was off-key on a second measure on the third note, and she kept that one note too long and her voice cracked. She's the only one out there singing the national anthem, and we're sitting in anonymity with our social media taking pot shots. People that go forward and do something, we only want the best of the best out there. And then we knock them down. Let's talk about Sunday morning after we've watched college football. He should have caught that. He's paid to catch that ball. And what do we say about the coach? 4th and 1, and he makes that call? Any idiot would know what to make on that call. And what do we say about the refs? Are you blind? They're out there on the field. They're participating, and we're taking pot shots. And we do it all the time. Somebody that's willing to stand up is target practice. And so we use it in our churches. We come in with our pen and our pencil, and we evaluate the sermon. Where was the third point? I didn't hear it. Or I don't like the order of the service, or that song, that did not belong in this service. We are making idols in the service. My personal favorite, contemporary worship music. I love that. And I could make that an idol if I wanted to. And I do sometimes. What is our heart like when we come into worship? There's some work that we can do there. John Wesley talks about gathering, proclamation, response, and sending forth. Now there's 4 on your list there. You can check them off if you want. or you can participate, okay? We can participate. The gathering for worship. We come into the worship space. It doesn't matter where it is. The community makes it church. And we come together and we leave the world for a little bit. That world out there is so seductive. It is so seductive. Money, success, celebrity, stuff. We have filled our houses with stuff that somebody's going to call 1-800-JUNK when we die and haul it off and throw it in a landfill. And we worship those things. That world is so seductive. And we come in here and we leave that behind. And we can experience the fullness of Christians coming together in worship. The gathering. Proclamation, we tell that story over and over and over again. All of the stories. The fish and the loaves. The lowering the man to be healed. Drop your nets and follow me. All of these stories that we've talked about over the last few weeks, those become our story as we proclaim that word over and over again in the service. And we tell it until we become part of it. The response, some people think the response is the offering. You pass the basket and it's all about money. A lot of people that don't want to come to church say, oh yeah, they always get to the money. It's always telling you to give what you can, and it's always about the money. The money is a symbol of giving ourselves to God. It is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. It's putting down your nets. It's coming into the presence of God and saying, here I am, this is all I have. Take it and use it. So the gathering, get away from the world. The proclamation, tell the story until it becomes yours. The response, give of ourselves. What are we giving to God every time we come in there? You know, one of my pet peeves, you remember last week or 2 weeks ago, get my back up, clear. Okay, one of my pet peeves is coming in and hearing somebody say, turn it over. I don't know, I don't like that. Have y'all had people say, turn it over to you? Do you say it? If you say it to me, Betty, I'm going to go, clear. Okay, I don't like people to tell me to turn it over because I'm a control freak. And for some reason, that phrase bugs me. But that's what we're called to do, is to come in and lay it down. I frequently don't want to turn it over because I want to be king. And it happens all along that disciples' path. I'll sit and put that crown on any given day. But when I come into the community of worship, we gather, we proclaim, we give a response, and our response is us. The money is a symbol. It's us. The last part of it is sending forth. We gather. We gain spiritual strength from being together. The fish and the loaves is given out, and now it's time for us to go out. Some people call that the Isaiah moment. In sending forth, here I am, Lord, send me. And we leave this church, this community of worshipers in the presence of God, and we go out and use our lives for something important. Do you really believe that God can transform the world through the gifts that you bring? Together, it works.